Alright, in today's tutorial, we're starting in Photoshop with my character illustration. I've already separated my layers and backpainted behind them to seamlessly allow for movement in our motion. Now, my file is quite large, sitting at 18 inches by 18 inches at 300 dpi. After we import to After Effects, we'll look at how to change the size of our composition to be a more reasonable size for our motion component. Take note that I have all of my layers named. I have already deleted any unwanted layers, and I've grouped all of the assets that make up my character's head and body. So once this is in After Effects, these group layers will already be placed within a pre-composition. We'll double-click on our project panel, find our PSD, and press Open. Our settings should be at Composition, Retain Layer Sizes, and Editable Layer Styles. We see our individual layers now, as well as our full composition. Double-click on the composition to bring it up in the timeline. If we look at our composition settings, we'll see that our preset is at Custom, with a width of 5400 pixels by 5400 pixels. This is pretty huge. We'll change this in just a minute. First, let's change the duration of our composition from 30 seconds to 20. Now to change the size of both the composition and the layers that we've imported, we're going to use a script. Go to File, Scripts, Scale Composition. In the dialog box, we'll change the width from 5400 to around 2000. You can see now, if we open up our composition settings, that the size is now set to 2200 by 2200, and all of our layers have been resized to fit within the new composition size. I'm taking my 3 background element layers and putting them into a pre-composition, simply to minimize the amount of layers in my timeline. I don't have any plans for animating these, so I'll go ahead and lock them as well. I have a few sound effects as well as music that I'm going to import into After Effects. This is pretty simple. Just drag and drop them into the timeline. Notice that they have a different color than the rest of my layers, and they also have a sound icon to turn the layer on and off instead of the eye icon in our other layers. I have a general idea for the timing of my sound effects, so I'm going to arrange these first since some of my movements will coincide with those sounds.
Hulk smash!
I'm duplicating Hulk smash sound effects, Apple D, so I can split it up. I want to have the word Hulk separated from the word smash so I can move them independently. Adjusting the length of the sound is as simple as clicking and dragging the edge to the desired length.
Hulk smash! Hulk smash! Hulk smash! Hulk smash!
With all of our sounds situated, let's start adjusting our illustration. I'll start by setting up the Hulk smash type to appear on the composition at the same time the sound effects happen by clicking and dragging the edge of the layer to the desired starting point.
Hulk smash!
I'll repeat this for the word smash.
Hulk smash!
That looks about right. Moving on to adding motion components to our head pre-composition. I've double-clicked on my head pre-composition to enter it. One of the reworks I did for this character illustration to prepare it for motion is drawing a new separate layer for the eyelids so that my character could blink. This is such a quick action, so there doesn't have to be a huge amount of detail to the eyelids. You can see here by toggling on and off our eyelid layer, it makes our character appear to blink. Now let's set up this motion. As with many things in Adobe programs, there's many ways to accomplish this. For this specific situation, I found the easiest way is to just adjust the layer's opacity, followed by a loop out expression. I'll select the eyelid layer, press T for opacity. Press the stopwatch to enable keyframes, set opacity at 0, then I'll zoom really far into my timeline using my trackpad, or you could use the slider at the bottom of the timeline, it's up to you. Then move the timeline indicator 1 frame over, type 100% opacity, which creates a new keyframe. Then move the timeline indicator over 2 more frames and change the opacity back to 0. Press spacebar to see the movement. and we have a successful blink. At this point, you could either copy and paste these keyframes down your timeline or utilize the loop out expression by holding Alt Option and clicking on the stopwatch and type a loop out. We see, however, that our blinking is occurring way too fast. Essentially, the loop out expression is making the 3 keyframes repeat back to back. To fix this, add another keyframe at the beginning of the timeline at 0% opacity by clicking the blue diamond towards the left of the screen. Now it will loop all of our keyframes. Expressions can seem intimidating at first, but when utilized correctly, they can save you an immense amount of time. Next up, I'm going to use the puppet position pin tool to make the character's eyebrows rise and fall during their idle pose. Let's start with the left eye. I'll come up to my puppet pin tool and add in my pins. Remember, it's easier for the areas of a layer to stay still when pins are placed closer together, and easier for areas of a layer to move when pins are spread out. I just want my eyebrow area to move without moving the shape of the eye. So I'm placing a few pins in the eye and placing one in the eyebrow. Since I'm only moving the pin in the eyebrow, I can delete the keyframes for the rest of the pins. Now I put my timeline indicator to where I want the high point of the eyebrow to be. Then move the pin with the composition window. A new keyframe is created. Looking good. Now add some easy ease. Select keyframes, right-click keyframe, keyframe assistant, easy ease. Add in a loop out expression. That's almost right. To make the eyebrow move up and down, we'll copy and paste the first keyframe down the timeline at an equal time interval. Add easy ease again. Then add back in our loop out expression. There you go. And I'll repeat the same process for the right eye. Select the puppet position pin tool, add my pins, delete unwanted keyframes for pins that have no movement, move the timeline indicator to the high point of the eyebrow, move the pin for the eyebrow within the composition window, copy and paste the first keyframe, move the timeline indicator to the next interval, add easy ease, then add the loop out expression. Make sure to save your file as you work. First up, I'm going to put the top lip and the bottom lip into a pre-composition, so I can treat them as one layer with the puppet warp tool. I'm also going to cut Apple X and paste Apple V, the roar sound effect, from my main composition to my head pre-composition, so I can hear it while making decisions on the mouth's movement. Now with the mouth pre-composition selected, I'll select the puppet position pin tool and start to add my pins. I want the middle of the mouth to stay relatively still while moving the top lip and bottom lip outward. I'm thinking about this as I place my pins. I'll come down to the timeline to delete the keyframes of the pins I don't plan to move. I'll select the pre-composition layer again, then press U to bring up only the pins that have keyframes left. I want the starting point before the roar to be a bit more closed than the original illustration is, so I'll move the timeline indicator close to the start of the sound effect. Then I'll adjust the pins accordingly. After I'm happy with the shape of the mouth, I'll move the timeline indicator to where I want the next keyframes. This is during the loudest part of the roar. Adjust the pins in the composition window. Watch the playback. Then I'll move the timeline indicator to the point that I want the mouth to be back at its original form. Then copy and paste the first set of keyframes. Lastly, we'll copy and paste the second set of keyframes of the mouth fully open to when we want the mouth to start closing. Add easy ease. The hotkey for that is F9. Alright, let's watch the motion in the head so far. It's looking good. As part of the idle pose, I'm going to again use the puppet position pin tool. Since I've already showcased this a few times, I'm going to speed up the video so you can just visually follow along as the same process is being used here. I'm also going to move the chin a bit when the mouth opens. Then making subtle changes to the timing of this. I'll be adding wiggle to many different layers within the illustration. I'll showcase this once or twice and then move on. We'll move on to the body. I'll double click on the pre-composition to enter it. It's difficult to see the character's pants, so I'll change the background color within the composition settings. That's looking better. We'll start with the left hand. Select the layer, press P, hold Alt-Option, and click on the stopwatch to open the expressions text box. Type out wiggle 710. Now the wiggle is looking pretty nice. However, I only want the wiggle to occur during the sound effect of the roar. Notice that the wiggle expression doesn't have keyframes or a stopwatch to enable them. So I'll have to add a separate slide control so I can adjust when the wiggle starts, how much it wiggles, and when the wiggle stops. With the left hand layer selected, I'll go to Effect, Expression Control, Slider Control. Notice, an Effect Control panel has appeared on the left side of the screen. I can change the name if I want. Now the slider control appears in our timeline. Remember, our first value is 7, and that represents how fast the wiggle will happen, while the second value is 10, and that represents the magnitude of the wiggle. Since the second number represents how much wiggle occurs, we'll want to highlight this number and pick whip it to our newly created slider control. We do get an error message. Error, syntax error, missing enclosed parentheses after argument list. This means I need to add an end parentheses at the end of the list text. Now I can start editing my keyframes on my slider control. I want the layer's wiggle to start at 0, so I'll ensure the first keyframe is set to 0 and then slide it to where I want the wiggle to start occurring. This indicates the hand will not wiggle anytime before this keyframe. Then I'll move my timeline indicator to where I want the wiggle to peak. I want there to be a lot of wiggling that occurs quickly, so I'm moving the timeline indicator about half a second down and then entering 70 to create this keyframe. Now we can watch the animation. We see the wiggle starts occurring pretty quickly. Now I need to have a stopping point for the wiggle. I want the wiggle to stop pretty abruptly, but slow down a bit before this abrupt stop. So I'll create 2 more keyframes to make this happen. I'll move the timeline indicator to the next stopping point, where I want the wiggle to really just kind of start slowing down, and then create a keyframe by entering 35. Move the timeline indicator a bit more to be the final stopping point for the wiggle, and enter 0 to stop the motion. This is looking pretty good now. Let's move on down to our right hand. I want the same exact wiggle to be applied here, so I'll be able to save quite a bit of time using a pick whip. I'll type in the same wiggle expression. Again, I'll select the second number in the expression and then pick whip the expression to the slider control we already made for our left hand. And again, I'll add the closed parentheses to correct the expression syntax. You certainly could create another slider control and follow the same steps outlined for the left hand layer. However, using a pick whip for this really does save us a lot of time. I've continued this same process on the pants and the body layer. Let's look at the playback. At this point, I go back into the body pre-composition and use the puppet position pin tool to add more movement to the hands, the body, and the pants. I'll speed this up a bit and add it to the end of the video for anyone that could benefit from watching it. It uses the same process as outlined earlier in this tutorial. Now I'm going to use a quick overlay animation that I found at footagecrate.com. Importing is as simple as dragging it into our timeline. I've decided to have this short asset appear over top of the Hulk type and Smash type when they appear during the composition. So I'll drag the asset on the timeline to start at the specified time. Then I'll need to adjust its position within the composition. Using the selection tool, I can drag it to the desired location. Looking good. Now duplicate it, Apple D. I'm first adjusting the timing for the asset, and then I'm adjusting the position of it. My overall plan was to have the beginning of the composition fade from white into the animated character, then have a white fill again with my illustration logo followed by a black screen with my website. So I'm almost done. Let's start with the white solids. Go to Layer, New, Solid. It's already set to the size of the composition. I can name the solid and then select white as the color. Notice the solid layer automatically runs for the duration of the composition. So first I'll shorten the length of it to about 2 seconds. Now to create the fade. I'll open up the layer's opacity property by pressing T. Move the timeline indicator to where I want the fading to start and create a keyframe. Then move the timeline indicator to where I want it to be completely gone and type 0. Alright, now I can just duplicate this white solid, Apple D. This white fill is for towards the end of the composition, and I don't plan on having any fades or animations on it, so I can delete these keyframes. Then move it down to the timeline to its desired time during the composition. After this white fill, I want a black fill layer, so Layer, New, Solid. Name and select black as the color. Adjust the duration and timing of the fill. I'll drag in my logo, which is saved as a PNG. Then adjust the duration and the timing of it. Now I can adjust the scale of it by pressing S and adjust the value. I'm going to move my logo underneath my black fill, just in case the timing of the logo doesn't cut off at the exact same point. Black fill would cover it up. So using the type tool, I'll click onto my composition and type out my website. If you're using your caps lock while typing in a type box, make sure you turn it back off afterwards because it can disable numerous things within After Effects if you leave it on. Then I can adjust the font and its characteristics in the character panel. Then center the type using the Align panel. I did go and fine comb a few movements with my composition before coming to the rendering process. I'm now fully satisfied with my motion and ready to render. We'll go through our rendering process real quick. Composition, add to render queue, leave best setting, click lossless, Format is QuickTime, then change to Apple ProRes 444. Leave the rest of the settings. Select your output to. Press Render. Our file is looking pretty good, but it's still quite big, so we're going to drag and drop it into our media encoder. I'm clicking on H.264 to open up the export settings. These are all going to stay the same. However, I am going to change the size to be a bit smaller, to 1080 by 1080. Then I'm ready to render. Click OK, then click the green play button. And we can compare file sizes. The original .NET movie was 986 megabytes. Our encoded .mp4 is only at 15.8 megabytes. Let's watch the final rendered composition.
Hulk smash!
As promised, I'll have a sped up version now of more puppet warping if you'd benefit from seeing that. If not, I hope this tutorial has given you some fun ideas to incorporate motion into your character illustration. So good luck!